There, it's Dr. Gianna Reams, and we are going to tackle over the next two, maybe three videos, the rather interesting, thorny question of who killed Philip of Macedon, and maybe even a little of why. Okay. It's worthy of an Agatha Christie novel, not so much in maybe the whodunit as just all the lead up to it. That's why it's going to take at least two videos just to set the stage. Before we get there, I do want to say we were supposed to this week have our second special guest, Sabina Mueller, but timing didn't work out. I'm having some concrete work done at the house, and they decided to pour concrete on the day that and time that Sabina was supposed to be on, and we didn't want all the background noise, so we're going to do that later in May. Instead, I'm going to do these videos on Philip. Also, last time with our guest, Dr. Graham Wrightson, who was talking about sarissai and how they are made and his projects working on them. And I mentioned that the book that we co-edited came out. At the time, all I had was a picture, but now the volume has arrived. I'm so excited. And again, this is an honor of Ed Anson. So it's out. It's out. Also, a reminder to, or a couple of reminders that these videos cover various topics, and so sometimes I will reference something that was said in a prior video, particularly when it comes to our sources, and as a result, you may want to go back in and take a look at the videos that are on the sources. They're all under a playlist there, so you can kind of look around for things that have been discussed prior that I do sometimes refer to. The Another reminder as well is please like and subscribe to the channel so that you will get announcements of new videos. Gives you a chance to look through old videos. And again, like and subscribe to the channel helps the algorithm for this. So when it comes to Philip's murder, we really need to look at Philip's last year. Okay, arguably even his last 2 years. The politics that accelerate from about the middle of his reign on culminate, if you will, in the Battle of Chaeronea, this big clash between Philip, the Macedonians, and the Greek South. At the battle, the two primary city-states are Athens and Thebes. Sparta sat that one out. And after that, Philip spends about a year in the south. The battle occurred in the fall. Philip spends about a year in the south settling things, setting up his Corinthian League, and planning his invasion of Persia. And another point, maybe I'll talk about all the lead up to the Battle of Chaeronea, but this time I want to deal with his death because it's a thorny issue. When Philip returns, okay, with the army, with Alexander, with various others, he makes what will be his last wedding. I'm sure he didn't know that at the time. And just a reminder, in that video I talked about Philip's initial several years, about 10 years, a little more, well, more like 7 years. And I mentioned that in Philip's first 5 years, he married 5 women. So the Argeads, Macedonian royal house, practiced royal polygamy, largely for political reasons. In the old joke in the ancient world about Philip taking a new wife for every new war, that's not quite the case, but of course it's looking back to these first 5. There was one other wife. Number 6 was Medea, a Thracian. And then this final wife turns out to be a Macedonian. And there's been a lot of ink spilled on why he married her. She, being a Macedonian, it inclines people, I think, to assume it is not political, and sometimes even to anachronistically attribute that wedding, that marriage, to a midlife crisis. Guys, Philip didn't live in our era. Okay, we need to stop attributing to ancient people modern psychological processes. So no, he didn't marry Cleopatra. And yeah, she has the same name as his daughter. Cleopatra was a fairly common upper class Macedonian name. He didn't marry her because he was feeling his age and fell in love with this younger girl. She would have been somewhere between maybe 16, 18, 20 at the outside. So it is not an older man and a younger woman that he's falling in love with. We have to remember some things that I went over in that first video about Philip, and that is how much he changed the kingdom. Okay. By the time we get to Alexander, Philip's reign is sometimes looked at as this golden age, and everybody loved Philip, etc., etc. This really underplays some of the contention in Macedonia in Philip's first years, when he is bringing in Upper Macedonia to Lower Macedonia and combining these, and that these had once been independent kingdoms. Alamael and Kestis, Orestes, they had kings, okay, prior to being brought in. And we might want to consider that, okay, of what could have been some political reasons for Philip making this marriage toward the end of his life. So we don't know exactly what was driving that, but I can virtually guarantee you it was not a midlife crisis. Okay, there is more here than meets the eye. It is also not necessarily about her being pure Macedonian and Alexander being half Epirote. This is not a concern. It matters who your daddy is. Okay. Later, and again, this is looking back with the hindsight and some of the objections to Alexander's children as being half barbarian, and then this is then focused on Alexander. No, okay, that was not really a concern. If they were going to argue that, then Philip was half Illyrian. His mother Eurydice may herself have been half Illyrian. This is not the way that ancient people really think that much about it. The Asians are a little too far afield. Epirotes are just over the hill. Okay, so that also is not necessarily the problem. So when we are looking at the accounts of the wedding and the accounts of everything that happened later, up to and including Philip's murder, we have a source problem. It's always the sources, and in some of those, the playlists on the sources, again, you may want to go back and look at some of those. 3 sources are particularly important to this Philip's last year, and they include, okay, Diodorus, Justin, and Plutarch. And I talk about all of these guys in some of those earlier videos because they also write about Alexander. So they're among the big 5. With Plutarch, okay, we'll start there. Plutarch isn't writing about Philip. He's writing about Alexander. And he has this theme, and I discussed it in that video, of Alexander's good Hellenic education that lifts him above his barbarian roots. That's Plutarch's point. So Philip is the barbarian here. So Philip doesn't get a life because he can't. Okay? In terms of how Plutarch is shaping the narrative about Alexander. So Plutarch is not portrayed, Philip is not portrayed very well in Plutarch. Then we have the problem of Justin. Justin just can't be trusted. In fact, in this book is a very important, useful chapter by Beth Carney where she talks about Justin and parricide and the way that Justin looks at and considers women, okay, particularly the dynastic mothers in his history. Justin gets the details wrong, okay, frequently. And we have to take this into account. And so some of the material he talks about in the death and after events, just you can't believe them, okay? I'm starting to take to Justin almost a really cynical view of if somebody else isn't talking about it, it's a big red flag, especially when they're contradicted by other sources. And then we have Diodorus. Diodorus likes Philip. He calls him the greatest of the kings of Europe. Diodorus's problem is more shortening. Okay, it doesn't give us some of the details that we wish it did. And so these are our sources. about this last year of Philip's life, and they lead to a lot of confusion, unfortunately, in exactly what happened. So we've got this wedding with Cleopatra. There is more going on here again than meets the eye. At the wedding, okay, and Cleopatra's parents weren't alive anymore. She was under the authority of her uncle, a man named Attalos. Okay. Now, Attalos is often assumed to belong to Lower Macedonia, and he may very well have. We don't know where he is from. We do know that he married a daughter of Parmenion, and Parmenion, if Charles Edson is right, and I think he might be, Parmenion's actually from Upper Macedonia. In fact, an area near Lynkestis called Pelagonia. So I don't think we can necessarily assume that Attalos is from Lower Macedonia, but we just don't know. So Philip marries this girl, and again, this may have been some kind of appeasement to settle infighting between Upper Macedonia and Lower Macedonia. We don't know. But we do know that at the wedding, Attalos insulted Alexander. Okay, he gave a toast saying that he hoped that this new union would bring forth a legitimate heir. Okay, and some people have used this that the Macedonians didn't really believe that Alexander was a legitimate Macedonian. No, this is a slap at Alexander's mother and his own legitimacy. Okay, it's much more basic. And that maybe Alexander's not Philip's son, which would disqualify him. One must be an Argead. And just a reminder, Argead inheritance for the throne is complicated because it's not complicated. In other words, any Argead male can become king. You simply have to belong to the clan. There is a preference for the current king's son, or the former king's son, if you will, and maybe even his eldest son, or at least the son from the most prestigious mother. Okay, but you just have to be an Argead, and so this is why every time one king dies, there seems to be a bloodbath in the succession. Okay, and this goes back a while. So this is a slap at Alexander. It's a slap at Olympias. And Alexander stands up and throws a cup at his head and clocks him and says, "What do you think I am, a bastard?" Okay, that's exactly what he's implying. And Philip then pulls a sword and advances on Alexander. Okay, this is pretty shocking. He's attacking his own son. Now, again, there's more going on here than is sometimes understood. Alexander's just assaulted a guest. Okay, yeah, he's about to become Philip's father-in-law or uncle-in-law, really. But he is a guest in the house, and that means he is under the sacred demands of hospitality. So when Alexander stands up and throws a cup at him, that breaks hospitality. That's a religious affront. So Philip, who was probably had at least a couple sheets to the wind, if not three of them, pulls his sword and goes after Alexander because he has broken the rules of hospitality here. Okay? Alexander then storms out and leaves the capital and takes his mother with him. Okay? And we don't know exactly who went with him, but he went into exile. Now, I want to point something out that if Philip had really wanted to kill Alexander, he would never have gotten out of town. Okay? So this is more a case of Alexander exiling himself rather than Philip exiling him, it would seem. And again, takes Olympias with him into exile. She winds up in Epirus. He winds up somewhere in Illyria. Okay. We don't know exactly where, it's not stated. It just says Illyria. And then they wait. Okay. What they're planning, if anything, is entirely unclear. Again, this is a frustration of Diodorus. He doesn't tell us a lot. Plutarch has his own agenda going on, and Justin is very brief about it. Now, whenever I was writing the novels, Dancing with the Lion, Okay. And particularly the second one. The first one's more about Alexander and Aristotle in school. The second one is about the politics. And in the midst of doing a lot of the research, a couple things became clear. One, we don't have the whole story. Okay, there's a lot more going on here. I had to come up with reasons for why some of this was happening, because we're not told. We just don't know. And also the timing of events stopped making sense. Okay. So I do detail in here, if you are curious, in like reading historical fiction, and in the second book, I talk about a lot of these events. And so Alexander and friends, we don't know who's with him, if anyone. Presumably he has at least guards and maybe some friends with him. He's up in Illyria waiting on things. And while he's gone, Philip, who now doesn't have his primary heir, begins to reshape the household. And he does a couple of things that could have made Alexander very nervous. One of these is to marry his eldest daughter, Canana, to his nephew, Amyntas. Now, Amyntas is a few years older than Alexander, so he is theoretically in line for the throne, but at the Corinthian League, Alexander's name comes after Philip's and then Amyntas. So he is not in direct line for the throne, or now is he? Okay. And the other thing Philip does is arrange a marriage for Arrhidaeus. And Arrhidaeus and Alexander, we're not entirely sure which one of them is the elder, possibly Arrhidaeus. If so, not by much, just by a year, maybe even a few months. But we know something was wrong with Arrhidaeus, and we're not entirely clear what. Some kind of mental infirmity. A lot of things have been suggested, but it was serious enough that Arrhidaeus wasn't necessarily taken into combat. Later, he seemed to have nursemaids. Certainly, after Alexander's death, when he does become a king, because we're out of Argias at this point, rules with his nephew, Alexander's son, he needed a regent. He's in his 40s or 30s by this point, actually, and he needs a regent. So this tells us something. But he offers this son to a fellow over in Asia named Pixodaros. Philip is interested in a bridgehead into Asia. And so he's trying to do this in very traditional ways by making a marriage between Arrhidaeus and Pixodaros's daughter. Both of these things are reported back to Alexander, and Alexander blows a gasket. Now, keep in mind, Alexander's 19. So patience and perhaps military strategy is not as high in his brain at this point. And he sends a message to Pixodaros saying, do you want the broken down war horse, or do you want the stallion here? And Pixodaros at that point says, oh, maybe there's something weird going on here, and do I really want to do this? And withdrew the marriage proposal. Okay. Now, in the sources, and we're told about this largely in Plutarch, it sounds as if all of this happened after Alexander came back, but we have a travel problem. Okay. Sometimes folks today, because we travel very quickly between places, we forget how long it can take for messages to get to places. Ergo, it's quite likely that Alexander was still in exile, because we're told he was told about all this stuff by his mother, who was told about it by his friends. Some of them are still back in Pella. So you have to figure in travel time between all of these places. So it would seem to make a lot more sense that this stuff is going on while Alexander is in exile. Okay. Philip's plugging gaps. Okay. In that case, then Alexander's offer to Pixodaros starts to make more sense. He's kind of setting up shop as an alternative Argead king. This wouldn't be the first time that Macedon has had a challenge like that. But somewhere in the midst of this, Philip is convinced to send to Alexander for reconciliation. He's shamed by a friend from Corinth, and says, when Philip, how can you plan a war in Persia when you can't even keep peace in your own household? So he sends to Alexander and he brings him home. And it's not until after Alexander is back in Pella that his stunt with Pixodaros is revealed. So again, you have to figure in travel time to all of this. So travel time to get the news to Alexander, Alexander sending the message across land before it can get on a boat to go across to Asia Minor, to Caria, to Pixodaros. And that takes a while. So all of these things come to a head, perhaps not that long before Philip's death, when Philip finally hears back from Pixodaros saying the wedding is off. And then Alexander gets in trouble. He's in the doghouse. And Attalos, the actor who performed the role of taking the embassy, and this is very common for actors, is actually, we're told, put in stocks in Pella, in the Agora. This is a little shocking. This is an overstep from Philip. Part of the reason actors are used is that they were sacred to Dionysus. And so to do some sort of physical offense against one is again, it's a breach of protocol. Attalos should have been untouchable. Okay. I want to point out, by the way, that the person who Philip takes whenever he's dressing Alexander down for his stupidity is Philotas, Parmenian's son, eldest son, who later is part of the Philotas affair, etc. So all of these are the precursors, and a lot of ink has been spilt over Philip and Olympias not getting along through much of Alexander's raising. This is frankly the work of Plutarch, who does a hatchet job on Olympias. My mentor, colleague, and friend Beth Carney has written a fair bit about how Olympias is misrepresented in the sources. This idea that Philip and Olympias didn't get along, especially earlier in Alexander's childhood, again, it's this imposition later that may owe a lot kind of to this conflict in Philip's last years. And that conflict would appear to be some sort of political struggle, maybe between Upper Macedon and Lower Macedon, that's going to eventually end with the murder of Philip. So these are all of the things that occurred in the first part of Philip's last year. Alexander's back in Pella probably by the spring or summer before Philip's death. But he was in exile for a while. We're not told how long, so we do not know how long he was up there. But probably again by spring he returned. If we assume maybe the wedding, and weddings in Greece were, if June is the modern month in the U.S. for weddings, it was Gamaliel in antiquity, which is midwinter, so January. So he may have been gone, assuming he can get all the way into Illyria at that time of year. He may have been gone for a couple of months. Okay. But he's back then, and we're going to get the next part of this story in the second video that then talks about some of the whodunit, what happened and whodunit leading up to it. But I needed to lay the framework leading into this about why tensions between Alexander and Olympias and Philip are not that great, and why there were later accusations that Alexander, or at least his mother, were involved in Philip's murder. And in the next video, I will argue that no, they were not. It would have been extremely bad, stupid timing for them. But one of the things to keep in mind as we move into the next are those marriages, the one that failed with Pixodaros and Arrhidaeus, Alexander's brother, but the one that succeeded with Alexander's older sister, Canana, and his cousin, Amyntas. Okay, so we'll stop there.